It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman, and this show is brought to you by emailrevealer.com. You can go to emailrevealer.com, get a copy, an autographed copy of my book. I never get that right. An autographed copy of my book, How to Become a Successful Private Investigator. You can also buy that book on Amazon.com. But also, too, if you go to emailrevealer.com, let's say you're estranged from a family member due to the adoption process. You gave up a child for adoption, or you were adopted out, and you want to locate your biological relative there. Emailrevealer.com. We can handle adoption investigations. Got a great news source on that. It's working out great. I'm very happy with it. Asset searches, online infidelity investigations. You give us your boyfriend, girlfriend's email address. We trace it back to online dating websites. Catch them cheating online. Emailrevealer.com. Okay, we got a returning guest today. Mark Devlin. Mark Devlin's got a website called markdevlin.co.uk. And also, too, he's written a book called Musical Truth. We had him on before. And the musicaltruthbook.com. And also, too, you can keep an eye on him. If you're going to be in the States, he's going to be traveling to the United States here. And in March 2018, on March 10, he's going to be in Phoenix, Arizona at the Truth Mind Reality Conference. Mark, are you there?
I'm here, Ed. Good to be back with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Mark, we're taping this on the day that they have the OJ hearing. And everybody knows how I'm an OJ fanatic. And Mark was so kind to give me first I told him 30 minutes and the hearing went long. OJ's rambling on. So thank you so much, Mark, for giving me a little bit extra time. Tell us about yourself. Who is Mark Devlin?
Well, I'm a radio and club DJ turned truth researcher, author. Sometimes I wonder why I did that, but basically I got into this whole arena of truth research a few years ago when I came to discover that the world was nothing like I thought it was. So my background is as a DJ, and I've kind of drawn on my knowledge of the music industry to put out that book, Musical Truth, and to do my podcasts and do my public talks. And my main area of interest now is exposing the true nature of the corporate music industry and the entertainment industry at large, which groups and networks and individuals seem to be running things behind the scenes, and what the agendas seem to be in terms of social engineering and mass mind control. And then you have links going into the world of the dark occult and symbolism and all that stuff. So you come to realize it's a very tangled web, and it runs very, very deep indeed. So it's certainly a full-time job. It keeps me busy, and I discover new stuff about it every day. And that's what I'm doing with my life now. Don't ask me why.
I hear you, man. Sometimes I wonder too, But now the thing is, everyone's. Remember they had those the YouTube series. It's like a series of documentaries about the devil's influence in rock music and stuff like that, and heavy metal.
They sold their souls for rock and roll.
Right. Which was great. I really enjoyed that. But today,
it was from a Christian perspective. So, if you're not a Christian, it might put you off all the biblical references and stuff. But I did think that was quite a good series. They did a pretty good job of exposing the satanic side of the industry, which is certainly real. You don't have to be religious in any way to recognize that there's a very dark, satanic, Luciferian agenda going on. So they did their thing in exposing a lot of good information there, I felt.
Well, since the last time we talked, I don't know if I told you this, but I had Hank Harrison on the show. Who worked for, you know who Hank Harrison is?
Yeah, Courtney Love's father. Right.
And also he worked for the Grateful Dead and stuff like that. And offhand, he told me, and I went and interviewed him in person too. We filmed with him at his house. And he told me that Kenneth Anger told him that that executives at MTV were doing satanic rituals. They would have parties and get-togethers and stuff like that. And then after the party, a few of them would stay back, and then they would do ceremonies and satanic rituals.
Well, to be honest, that doesn't surprise me. With all the stuff that I've uncovered, it doesn't surprise me. I've not heard that before, but it seems to be quite similar to what you hear about what goes on in the record industry in terms of spells and hexes being cast on master tapes of records before they get pressed up in the plant, and they're probably doing it now with MP3s and digital files and stuff. Who knows what kind of stuff they could be loading into the sound frequencies there. But yeah, I've certainly heard about that going on in the record industry, so why wouldn't it be happening in the film industry as well?
MTV is the music video channel. Maybe you don't have it there. Yeah, MTV is the music television channel here in the States. It used to be show music videos. I don't know what they do now, like reality TV crap. Fascinating, interesting too. You mentioned this about a couple of things. One is, McAfee, the McAfee software, the antivirus software. It turns out there was a documentary about him, and it turns out that when his company was small, they had a witch working in their office doing spells over the software that now is like on almost every computer in the world, Well. And the other thing, too, I want to tell you about is when I went up to, I was up in L.A. one time, in West Hollywood, on the day that Whitney Houston died. Up there, and they would have that big Grammy the night before the Grammy parties were all over town. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before, like all these people fighting in the street and all these half-naked women walking around. And I'm from Vegas, and I'd never seen. It was just like there was a spirit had taken over that town in a way that I had never seen before. I was really taken aback.
Wow.
Now,
yeah, I went to that hotel. I was in LA in April, and I did a tour of a lot of these music industry related hotspots, and it was pretty much a death tour, to be honest, because it was, Michael Jackson's house where he was discovered, the Beverly Hilton Hotel where Whitney Houston's body was discovered in the bathtub.
Right.
We went to the hotel where Janis Joplin's body was found, the Landmark Hotel, managed to sneak into the room there, the very room that she was discovered in. Went up to Laurel Canyon. We saw Cielo Drive, where the Tate murders are said to have taken place. We saw Jim Morrison's old house, Frank Zappa's old house. Yeah, that was quite a memorable tour, man.
Yeah, that would be because I know the guy that does the Hollywood Death Tour, Scott Michaels. And right. That would be a great tour, like a death rock and roll tour,
Well, it would occupy you all day.
Yeah. Well, now, what's going on now? Because I don't follow hip-hop that much, but I know that you're into it. And you hear all this stuff about guys like Jay-Z and stuff like that being in the Illuminati. They even have that picture of Jay-Z where... what do you call it? He's supposed to be like a picture from the 1800s of a guy that looks exactly. Yeah. I was just thinking about that last night. Before we get started, what do you make of that?
Well, I mean, it's certainly intriguing, isn't it? There's this set of photographs of people from, decades past or centuries past. I think these photographs date from like the early 1900s or possibly the late 1800s. And a whole bunch of them look very much like current day celebrities. So there's one of Nicolas Cage,
right?
A guy that looks very much like Nicolas Cage. There's one of a guy that looks very much like John Travolta. And Nicolas Cage and John Travolta are unusual looking guys. They're not regular kind of people that you see in the street every day. They got very distinctive features. And there's these old photos of people that look just like them. And there's one of this black guy on the steps of a brownstone in Harlem or something from the early 1900s. And he looks very much like Jay-Z. So people have been speculating, are these people ancestors of these celebrities? And it's a bloodline thing, and what we're seeing now is just the current generation of this bloodline, or is there some kind of cloning or reincarnation or something like that going on? I don't know, but it's intriguing either way.
Yeah, I was thinking that, maybe they have access to some kind of because you know how they are doing those human experiments now where if you drink children's blood or get transfusions of children's blood, maybe these guys have some kind of but then again, we're watching them age right before our eyes, so that can't be it.
Well, yeah, I didn't want to go there. I didn't want to go with cloning either. Yeah. I'm really trying to stay away from cloning, but it keeps coming across my radar, and I don't want it to.
Okay, well, we'll solve that on another show. Let's. No. So. What have you've been examining hip hop, and you've been talking about Afrika Bambaataa and his whole thing that came out with him about molesting these kids and stuff. What have you been working on? I heard, by the way, that you just did a show on Jan Irvin, I believe it was.
Jan Irvin, yeah.
Jan Irvin, yeah. And I thought it was Jan, but anyway, I had him on my show once, and I really don't like to book people who've just been on somebody else's show, so this is kind of a coincidence. So I don't want to shout out to Jan Irvin there.
Sure.
What's the show called? It's
it's Gnostic Media. His website is Gnostic Media, and his podcast is called Unspun. And he does a lot of great work looking at social engineering and how that whole thing gets done. He's exposed a whole bunch of people who turn out to have connections to the intel agencies, the CIA, FBI, MI6. They have connections going into Yale and Harvard and Skull and Bones and Bohemian Grove and all these expressions of the elites and the establishment. So done a lot of great work. And I was on his show live on Tuesday. Had a few technical issues, which is often the case with live shows. But yeah, we spoke about the whole Bambaataa thing there. And it's not a new story. So, to be clear, this story emerged in spring 2016, but it's an ongoing one. So there's new kind of elements to it which are coming forward all the time. And I'm delving into it a lot now because I want to include a big section on it in my next book, Musical Truth Volume 2, which is going to be due out in about January. So I'm really kind of immersing myself in this story now and getting familiar with the many elements of it. And that's why I'm happy to talk about what I've come across so far right now. And I've also got to shout out Nino210, our mutual friend, because I think he suggested that we should connect to talk about this, and Nino's getting involved in research on this as well, and he's turned up a lot of great stuff. There's a couple of nuggets of information that he's thrown up that I want to share with you today as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I was originally trying to book Nino, and then he told me, well, I don't have it all together, but get a hold of Mark Devlin, because he's just been doing all this stuff. All right, great. So, shout out to everybody. Everybody got a plug. Okay, great. Okay. So what'd you come up with on Bambaataa? Because, by the way, I think the audience knows that I grew up with Afrika Bambaataa in the Bronx, and we knew him as Kev at the time. And he used to hang out with he was much older than me, and even older than my sister. He knew my sister much better than me, but was close with this guy named Fat Steve, who was. It's funny because I was thinking before the show, we called him Fat Steve because there was another Steve, a white guy named Steve. So we used to call him White Steve and Black Steve, but then that turned it wasn't going over too well. So he became Fat Steve, and that's we knew these guys just from hanging out in the Bronx and Rosedale Park and Crows Avenue and all that kind of stuff. But give us an idea. What did you uncover?
Okay, well, first of all, that's amazing that you grew up with Bambaataa and you knew him back in the Bronx, so I might be tapping you for a couple of bits there as we go. But I'm sure you'll be familiar with many of these names and these scenarios that I go through as you hail from those parts. So Afrika Bambaataa, as people may or may not be aware, is considered to be one of the founding fathers of hip-hop culture. He's one of these iconic names that you hear bandied about by anyone that is connected with hip-hop heritage in any way, alongside the likes of Kool Herc, who's generally considered to be the pioneer of the DJing aspect of hip-hop culture, and also Grandmaster Flash, and you have guys like Fab Five Freddy and Grand Mixer DST. But Bambaataa's name was always there in the same sentence as these guys, and he's always been a highly revered figure by anyone that's involved in this whole game. So I've been a hip-hop DJ for many years, and you're kind of conditioned and entrained to think of Bambaataa as this legendary figure. So his background is he was born 1957 in the Bronx, real name Kevin Donovan. And he fell in with this gang known as the Black Spades, this kind of street gang out of the Bronx. And from what I can make out, the Black Spades were all about taking disaffected young males out of these impoverished communities and kind of giving them an identity within this gang. And what seems to be the case with the Black Spades is there were many other gangs operating in that area at the time that were involved in criminal activity. And the Black Spades were about keeping these young males out of those gangs and away from trouble, and kind of giving them self-improvement, and they were all about urban regeneration, and they also practiced some philosophical and spiritual doctrines, which was very much rooted in, first of all, Afrocentrism. So it was in training black kids to recognize their African roots, their genealogy, their ancestry. And it was also very much rooted in the Islamic faith. And there have been various spin-offs of Islam which have been packaged specifically for African Americans. So you've got the Nation of Islam faction which was the organization that Malcolm X was involved with, and also Muhammad Ali went over to it. It's the one that is run by the minister Louis Farrakhan to this day. He's been the leader of that faction for many decades, and it was Elijah Muhammad back in Malcolm X's day. So you've got that. Then you've got the facet known as the Nation of Gods and Earths, and there's a hip-hop group called the Poor Righteous Teachers that were involved in that. Many rappers have kind of nailed their colors to these different masts. The Nation of Islam has included X-Clan, Brand Nubian, Ice Cube, a number of other rappers that have kind of adhered to its philosophy. Also a tribe called Quest. Then you've got the New Warbian movement, which is associated with this guy, Dr. Malachi York, who is currently in jail serving a 135-year sentence on various charges related to paedophilia and various sexual abuse.
Really?
So we can get on to Dr. York as we go on. So Bambaataa was with the Black Spades, but he then formed a kind of offshoot organization known as the Bronx River Organization. And later that just became known as the organization. And as far as I can make out of that morphed the Universal Zulu Nation, which is this movement that he's very much associated with, and he was the leader of for many years, right the way through to 1994. The Universal Zulu Nation is an organization which has branches all over the world. So from the Bronx, it grew very, very powerful and very influential and spread its tentacles. And you've now got offshoots of it in Paris, in London, all across Europe, in various countries around the world. And like I say, it's very much rooted in spiritual kind of practices which are linked to the Islamic faith and the Moorish faith as well. They describe themselves as not just Muslims, but Moors. So what's that organization? There was the Universal Moorish Church or something. Let me just get my notes up because I'm still trying to stay familiar with all this stuff.
Hey, while you're looking for that, the Black Spades, they did, I went to a Catholic school, and the Black Spades approached the school and demanded that they give a certain number of scholarships out to these kids, like you said. And at first the school balked on it, and we had this big field next to the schoolyard. It was a big empty lot. I think the school did own it because it was fenced off. And they actually went in there. They went in there, and they were playing conga drums and stuff like that. They had like a big ceremony going on, and they were throwing things up against the fence, like trying to intimidate us, which they did. And ultimately, the school did back down and gave a bunch of scholarships away to these kids.
Well, yeah, so on the surface, it all appears to be very benevolent. It appears to be very good-natured. It appears to be all about self-improvement for these kids and all this stuff. And everything seemed to be good from the point of view of the public's perspective right the way through until spring 2016. So last year, you had this guy called Ronald Savage, and his street nickname was Bee Stinger. So he had been a part of the Universal Zulu Nation for many years. He had worked closely with Bambaataa and Jazzy J, his DJ. I think he used to carry their records to gigs and, just generally assist them in stuff. And he came out and accused Bambaataa of having sexually molested him over a prolonged period dating all the way back to 1980 when this guy, Ronald Savage, was around about 14 or 15 years of age. And he said, he was far from the only one. Bambaataa sexually abused many other youths that were part of that movement over a prolonged period. Right in the wake of that, you had another guy that came forward by the name of Hassan Campbell, and his nickname was Poppy, Brother Poppy. And he came out and stated that, similar to Ron Savage, he too had been sexually molested by Bambaataa on an ongoing basis going all the way back to the late 1970s. So Ronald Savage's revelations were in the form of some memoirs that he was putting out as a book. And he's got another one on the way, from what I hear, called Hip Hop's Darkest Secret. And then Poppy came out with a YouTube video stating more or less the same thing. And in the wake of that, there have been two more individuals that have come forward and accused Bambaataa of sexual molestation. And one of the guys that has come out with these claims is his former bodyguard and confidant and, another high-ranking member of the Universal Zulu Nation. His name is Lord Sharif. So he made a video a couple of months after that, I think last year, and he just blatantly calls Bambaataa out as a paedophile And he said that his sexual preference for young boys and his abuse of them is something that goes all the way back to the 1970s. And he said it's something of an open secret within the Universal Zulu Nation. Everyone kind of knows about it, but everyone just accepts it and nobody really comes forward and says anything about it. And this puts me very much in mind of the situation we had in the UK when the Jimmy Savile scandal broke in 2012, 1 year after Savile's death. And what we had then was when all these victims started coming forward and saying that Savile had been a predatory paedophile and that he'd sexually abused them over a very long period, you had a bunch of people working within the BBC saying, well, yeah, we all kind of knew about it. Nobody really liked Jimmy Savile. Everybody knew there was something about him. It was an open secret within the corporation, but nobody really said anything. We kind of knew to keep our mouths shut. And you had celebrities saying this. This was other presenters on the BBC, the likes of Esther Ranson and Terry Wogan and Bill Oddie, Noel Edmonds, Tony Blackburn. They were all saying, yeah, well, we kind of knew, but we weren't really allowed to say anything. So this guy, Lord Sharif, who is claiming that Bambaataa's paedophilia was known about going all the way back to the 70s, says that in 2007 he attempted to get something done about this, and he approached a council of his peers within the Universal Zulu Nation and, tried to get them to address this issue. And he said it sort of fell on deaf ears and it was buried and nothing was done about it. So here he is all these years later recounting that story and stating that that's what happened. So it's starting to look very ugly, and it's starting to raise all kind of questions in my mind about the real nature of the Universal Zulu Nation. And one question I've got is, when Bambaataa is said to have formed this organization going back to the 1970s, I think the Zulu Nation was somewhere around 75, 76, something like that. Given that Bambaataa wasn't born until 57, he was still in his teens when he put this whole thing together. And, with the benefit of hindsight and looking back now, how many teenagers have got that much influence and that much sway to be able to form an organization that brings in all these youths and, swells to its thousands in terms of its numbers and can have that much influence on a community? I think that's a very pertinent question that we can now ask. So, it's starting to look as if the Universal Zulu Nation was some kind of cult. Because when you look at it, it's got all the red flags and all the hallmarks of a sort of mind control cult, where members are brought in and they're kind of encouraged not to fraternize with anyone outside of the group. They keep their friendship and their close circle to just those members of the group. And there's a kind of hierarchy, and there's procedures, and there's rituals that are adhered to. These are all hallmarks of cults that we've seen many times before. And now that we've got all these revelations and all these people accusing Bambaataa of being a predatory paedophile, I think we need to ask these questions about what that whole thing was all about.
Yeah, well, what kind of rituals were they doing?
I don't know what the rituals were, but you get from Lord Sharif and people like that, you're getting these stories of how Bambaataa would go on tour with these young boys. These are pre-teen boys. I guess they're sort of 12, 13, 14 years of age, something like that. And he would always have a couple of these boys with him in his hotel room when he was on tour. And there's stories from Lord Sharif and from Poppy and from Ron Savage about how Bambaataa was frequently found with these young boys at his apartment. People would come into his apartment and find them watching gay porn together and getting up to all kinds of sexual stuff, unsavory sex acts. So it's not looking good. This is a guy that was looked up to and revered as a pioneering founding father of this beautiful art form, this culture of hip-hop. And we've now got these revelations about him. Understandably, a lot of people are going into denial. So you have people of a certain age, guys of like in their late 40s, their 50s, their 60s even, that have grown up with hip-hop culture, that were there in the very early days, are not wanting to address this whole thing because it's kind of tarnishing their nostalgic view of this art form and where it came from and what it is they've been a part of. So to a certain extent, the denial is understandable because these are pretty devastating revelations to come to terms with. But, it's not just one person that's coming forward with this stuff. There are many individuals stating that this goes back a very long way. So in the wake of all of this, when these accusations first came from Ron Savage and from Poppy last year, you had KRS-One coming out with a statement roughly to the effect of he didn't really care, he didn't really concern himself as to whether these accusations against Bambaataa were true or not. He said it doesn't really bother him because it doesn't take away from his achievements and his legacy and what he represents to hip-hop. Well, we certainly differ on that one because from my point of view, if these accusations about Bambaataa are true, it absolutely takes everything away from him and it completely tarnishes all his achievements and everything that he stood for in the movement. Because in my book, pederasty, child rape is something that just cannot be tolerated in any way.
Yeah, deal breaker. You would think a deal breaker, right?
That, then it takes away everything from them. So, we differ on that one.
Yeah, you would think it would be a deal breaker in anybody's book. You even if someone's a good friend or a hero of yours, once you find out these kind of things, you kind of move on. Now,
well, you would think so.
Yeah.
But of course, KRS-One has a lot invested in this whole hip hop culture thing. He's seen as something of a spiritual leader himself. He's known as the teacher, the Blastmaster KRS-One. He put together the Stop the Violence movement, the Heal movement, which are all about enhancing the positive side of hip hop and allowing it to be recognized as this kind of uplifting, inspirational thing that's really helped hundreds of thousands of young people turn their lives around. And it has. But KRS-One is kind of siding with Bambaataa here in terms of these statements. And that's upset a whole bunch of other people as well, the fact that he won't have anything said against him. Right.
What about KRS and any kind of accusations against him?
Not about him personally, but another interesting video emerged last year where KRS-One is in this sort of press conference, this question and answer session, and somebody asks him about his affiliations with Freemasonry.
Oh, really?
And KRS-One answers by saying he's not a Freemason, but he's considered to be a 33rd degree Master Mason by those within the movement, the fraternity, which is a puzzling thing to me because I thought you're either a Mason or you're not. So I don't know if there's some kind of honorary associate membership that you can have of these fraternities. I've never been a Freemason myself, so I don't really know. But as far as I understood, you take oaths of secrecy when you go up through the ranks of Freemasonry, and you swear not to divulge the secrets of that organization to anyone outside of it. But he says that Master Masons share the secrets of Freemasonry with him, and he's privy to all their teachings, despite not being a Freemason himself. That's quite a puzzling statement to me, and I think it's puzzled a few other people as well. So I don't know what's going on there, but for many people, KRS-One's image and legacy has been somewhat tainted by the fact that he's not prepared to call Bambaataa out on this.
What about other Freemasons? I mean, other hip hop people or rappers. Any of them admit to being Freemasons?
Well, Rick Ross and Jay-Z put out a record a couple of years ago called Freemason, where they kind of flirt with the idea that they're a part of this fraternal order. But then you've had a lot of records in recent years where rappers have come out and claimed to be a part of the Illuminati. So there's this kind of cachet of cool and mystique around the idea that you've got this all-seeing, all-pervading secret society called the Illuminati. And a lot of rappers seem to give the impression that they're a part of it. Kanye West, you've had Beyonce and Rihanna kind of flirting with all that stuff. Madonna, of all people, came out with a record 2 or 3 years ago called Illuminati, where she creates the idea that this is a very benevolent organization. It's all about the upliftment of humanity. They just want to help you. They just want to put these great artistic expressions into the world, and there's nothing sinister about it at all. So I guess it must be true if Madonna has made a record about it. But there's rumors that Jay-Z is a Freemason. That wouldn't surprise me, even though he's kind of making light of it on track, and you don't know how much of it is artistic license. He's a very key player in the industry, so I think he's certainly got to be a part of these organizations. I just want to go back to this guy, Lord Sharif, who is said to have been Bambaataa's bodyguard and confidant. So he came out on a video with Star. There's this presenter called Star that runs his own YouTube channel. Star in the Morning, I think it's called. And he's had Poppy on, he's had Ron Savage on. He's really covered this whole Bambaataa story since the accusations first emerged. And he's had all these people sort of adding weight to the story. So in this video interview that he did with Lord Sharif, there's a moment about 2 minutes and 6 seconds into the video where Sharif is relating this story of how he tried to convene this council of his peers to discuss what to do about the Bambaataa problem back in 2007. And very quickly, he mentions this guy called Hakim Bey. So he says, I consulted my Moorish brother, Hakim Bey. And it was Nino that kind of put me onto this. He did a bit of research into who this Hakim Bey character is. And he came up with this name. Just bear with me while I get my notes, because, again, this is new information for me. Where's this guy's wiki entry?
We can plug our sponsor, Archival Revival.
Well, please do, yeah. Just give me a moment.
Okay. Archival Revival. What they want, they're a film preservation company. So if you have any kind of old Christian films, you have them in your church attic or your Sunday school, they want to buy them from you. So you can contact them at archival.revival@gmail.com. All
right. So this guy, Hakim Bey, this is a pseudonym for a man by the name of Peter Lawford Wilson. Okay. So he has written under the name of Hakim Bey. And it gets very interesting when, first of all, you look at his Wikipedia entry. You find some very intriguing links there. He's talking about this church of this Moorish Orthodox church. And there's a section in his wiki entry which says the church maintained a presence at the League for Spiritual Discovery, LSD for short, which was a group established by none other than Timothy Leary.
Really?
And it's alleged, yep, so we have a connection to Timothy Leary, who, of course, has been exposed as having been an asset of the CIA. And it's alleged that Wilson, a.k.a. Hakim Bey, would visit for supplies of LSD. Then later on, you get a quote from Wilson himself, this Hakim Bey character, where he says, the real genesis was my connection to the communal movement in America, my experiences in the 1960s in places like Timothy Leary's commune in Millbrook. Millbrook Mansions was this house that was bequeathed to Timothy Leary by the Mellon Hitchcock family or bloodline, one of the elite bloodlines in the US at the time. And it was kind of given to him for him to run his LSD experiments. And he had many celebrities and figures from academia who would come to Millbrook, and Leary would dose them with LSD and kind of study the effects of it. And it's been shown that these studies were sponsored by those nice folks in Langley. It was all a product of the CIA as part of what was going on with that counterculture scene in the 1960s and all this mass mind control experimentation as part of MK Ultra. So we've now got a connection to Timothy Leary and the CIA through this guy Wilson, who connects back into the the bodyguard of Afrika Bambaataa. So now we've got a kind of loose link there between the Universal Zulu Nation and Leary and the CIA.
What about George Clinton? Does he fit into this? Funkadelic guy? Is that connected to the Process Church? He was LSD guy. Anything with him?
Not specifically that's come across my radar, but what have you got on Clinton?
Well, no, I'm just saying that, he's Process Church connected to the Process Church, the LSD guy.
I didn't realize he had a connection to the Process Church.
Yeah, I think it's public. I think he's publicly says he does.
Okay. Oh, that's one I need to look at then. Now, we also have a link from this Wilson guy going into NAMBLA.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Wait, clarify for me again. How does Wilson connect? The bodyguard was referencing him, saying that he was on his side or he was against him?
Yeah, so it's kind of this subtle throwaway reference, and maybe he didn't mean to put it in there, but it's just this one singular reference that he made when he talked about convening this council of the Universal Zulu Nation to discuss what to do about the Bambaataa problem back in 2007.
Right.
He says, I consulted my Moorish brother, Hakim Bey. And I'm pretty sure this is the same Hakim Bey because it's definitely the pseudonym of this guy Wilson. And he is connected to the Bronx. I've found an address in the Bronx to which Hakim Bey is registered as a business name. So it certainly seems to be the same individual. I've also got this book called The Journal of the Moorish Paradigm, Book 8, written by Hakim Bey, going back to 2007. And this book was signed by Afrika Bambaataa. So I've got this entry here in the publisher's page where it says the booklet is signed by Afrika Bambaataa, founder of the Universal Zulu Nation, the most important cultural institution in hip-hop. So we've got that link going there. Now there's a link going into NAMBLA, which is, I think it stands for the North American Man-Boy Love Association. And it's basically an organization which campaigns for pederasty and sex between grown men and underage boys. It's an organization which is an apologist for that kind of activity, I guess you would say. And it's had some very interesting members over the years. Allen Ginsberg, the famous beat poet out of New York that was very influential in that beatnik scene, which gave way to the counterculture of the 1960s, was a member of NAMBLA and, campaigned for its aims. I think William Burroughs, the other beat poet, was connected to it as well. And just bear with me again while I try and find the
who else was a member of NAMBLA was Mickey Cesar, who was the guy who ran Dial-A Joint for the Yippies there on Bleecker Street, 9 Bleecker Street. I think he was he wasn't it was kind of, he had a little studio place where he ran Dial-A Joint, and you could call up 777 cash 212-777 cash, and they would deliver you marijuana, or you can go in. They had like a little shelf where you could buy stuff off from there. And he was a member of NAMBLA. And what's his name? Ginsberg used to come down to Yippie headquarters too. I met Ginsberg a couple of times down there at Yippie down there at Yippie headquarters. He was. I get around.
Stories, man.
I get around. I get around. Yeah. I was just telling you, we just had the OJ parole hearing, and they mentioned one of my guests, Jeffrey Felix. I'm the only guy that ever interviewed him. So
sure get around.
I get around. Now I got the Mark Devlin on here. You're next.
Okay, so I've got this section here. This is in Peter Lamborn Wilson, who is Hakim Bey's Wikipedia page. Okay. And there's a section which says pedophilia advocacy. It says, in his book, William S. Burroughs versus the Quran, Michael Muhammad Knight describes his experiences with Wilson. He befriends him. He's invited to stay at his house. He begins writing a biography of Wilson. Then he learns more about Wilson/Bey's writings on pederasty. His view of Wilson sours, and with that of their friendship. And Knight says, writing for NAMBLA, which Wilson did, he was a sort of spokesperson for NAMBLA, amounts to activism in real life. He says, as Hakim Bey, Peter creates a child molester's liberation theology and then publishes it for an audience of potential offenders. And it says, Knight has disavowed his former mentor due to Wilson's advocacy of pedophilia/pederasty. So isn't that interesting?
Well, yeah. Well, then how can his bodyguard be saying he's going to consult with this guy who's a well-known pedophile himself?
Well, exactly. That's what he's saying. He's saying, we had a problem. We had to decide what to do about Bambaataa's pedophilia. So I consulted with a guy who was an associate member of NAMBLA and a spokesperson for their activities. And NAMBLA's activities are all about grown men having sex with underage boys. Not quite sure how that works, but it's a fascinating link either way. And, the plot thickens considerably as a result of it.
Any chance that some of these guys being sent forward, like the bodyguard, or some of these guys could be like false flag types being sent out as a diversion by Bambaataa, who has that kind of power and influence over people?
Well, it's possible. Bambaataa is in hiding, incidentally. Nobody seems to know where he is. When this whole thing broke, he kind of took off, and nobody knows where, his whereabouts. He did pop up on an interview when all this stuff broke last year. He went onto a radio interview and initially denied all the claims. And the host put to him the question, do you know Ron Savage, this guy that came out with the accusations? And he denied knowing him. Later, Bambaataa was kind of forced to apologize, and he admitted that he did know Savage after all, and he kind of apologized for what he'd done shortly before he took off, I think. But Ron Savage tells an interesting story of when he first came out with these accusations. He says he received a phone call from two senior members of the Universal Zulu Nation, and he said he recorded the phone call, and the recording of the phone call is available online. It's on YouTube if people want to listen to it. And he says these guys offered him money to retract his statement. And I think he said they offered him $5,000 initially and said, we'll pay you if you retract this statement against Bambaataa. And he said, look, it's not about the money. I'm not interested in that. And they upped the price to $50,000. And again, he said, I'm not interested in the money. I just want to get the truth out there about this guy. And I want to help other people, other young men have been sexually molested to feel comfortable in coming forward against their abusers. And Ron Savage has talked about this statute of limitations, which is in operation, apparently. It's a piece of legislation which prevents young men who claim to have been sexually molested from being able to, for their story to have any kind of legal standing after their 23rd birthday. It seems quite bizarre. So after their 23rd birthday has passed, any accusations they may have about something that happened prior to that cannot be legally standing in a court of law. That they've got to come forward before their 23rd birthday. It's a very strange piece of law. But, he's campaigning for that to be overturned, because you've got guys like Poppy and Ron Savage and these others coming forward now. And these guys are in their 50s. And they're talking about stuff that happened 35 years ago. And they don't really have a lot of legal standing now. Because so much time has passed. And they've made the point that, it's very, very difficult for these young men to come forward while it's happening or in their younger years, because the situation is very intimidating. The Universal Zulu Nation, of which they've been members, particularly if it is run as a kind of cult, is a very intimidating thing. And for you as a young kid to stand up and make an accusation against a senior member of this organization is something that a lot of kids are just not going to be able to do. It's the same thing as the Jimmy Savile revelations. All these people that claimed they'd been abused by him only came forward after the guy had died, because he was obviously connected very high up while he was alive. And these people seemed to know that, and they realized that they weren't going to get anywhere while he was alive. So it was only after he died that they felt confident enough to come forward with all this stuff. And that's what we're getting with these accusations now. And they go all the way back to the 1970s. So, 40 years. And this guy Bambaataa is said to have been molesting young men for the best part of 40 years.
Now,
and we're only finding out about it now.
Do we have any idea of the number of how many victims there are in the Bambaataa case?
I don't know, to be honest. I've not heard a number. But, these guys, Poppy and Ron Savage and this bodyguard guy, Lord Sharif, have spoken about many, many occasions where Bambaataa's been seen with young men in his apartment and in his hotel room and stuff like that. So I don't know what the numbers would be, but, it's a lot.
Now, the victims that have come forward, besides their own testimony, do they have any kind of photographs or letters or anything like that, text messages, recordings?
Not that I've heard of, no. It appears to be word-of-mouth stuff.
Okay, but when they come forward, everyone who is in the know, everyone kind of says, yeah, we all knew that.
That's what we're getting.
Right.
That there's a lot of members and former members of the Universal Zulu Nation that are saying, oh, everyone kind of knew about Bambaataa's sexuality, but we didn't say anything. So
now, interesting. Zulu Nation is still in existence today?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It's got membership all over the world, and it's very rooted in its kind of spiritual doctrines. It's seen as almost a religion. It's like a religion. As I say, it's rooted in Islam and an offshoot of the Islamic faith. And it's very heavy on Afrocentric imagery and stuff. It seems to be one of these organizations that's very much crafted towards black people, as different offshoots of Islam are. And it holds appeal for many people within the hip-hop community. So it's still absolutely in existence, and Bambaataa's not been its leader since 1994. He was replaced back then, but it's very strong, and it still holds sway over hundreds of thousands of members, I guess, in the world.
Now that's interesting, because I can't think of another group from the 70s that's still in existence. Like the Young Lords or the Latin Kings or the Black Spades, like you said before, Black Panthers. They're all gone. But this group of pedophiles, somehow they seem to, withstand time. What's holding them together?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, something is, yeah. It's stood the test of time.
Yeah.
And, my question is now, who really is Bambaataa? And, we're told that he came from this sort of harsh background on the streets of the Bronx, and he was just this sort of punk kid that drifted into these gangs, and he decided to form this offshoot of the Black Spades and the Bronx River organization, which became the Universal Zulu Nation. But like I said earlier, he was in his teens when he did this, and what teenager really can have that kind of sway and that kind of influence if there's not some sort of input from other parties? That's just my curious mind, but I don't know. I mean, maybe you've got some idea on that, having grown up in that area in those times.
Well, in the building where I grew up, it's kind of it was an interesting place, because a lot of people did come out. You know who came out of the Catholic school that I went to was Sotomayor, the Supreme Court Justice. She went to the same Blessed Sacrament school that I was just telling you about around the same time that I went there. That the Black Spades demanded that they have some kind of scholarships. A friend of mine, his sister was Corey Day, who was in the band Dr. Buzzard's original Savannah band, and she was dating Tommy Mottola, and she has a song, and you can look it up right now, and she sings about Tommy Mottola in the song, blowing his mind on cheap grass and wine, and Tommy Mottola, Yeah,
that was Mariah Carey's one-time husband.
Yeah, right. And here we were living in the Skylar houses on Crows Avenue. You can look it up on your Google Maps. It was 1210 Crows Avenue, where it was a government-subsidized building. There's hundreds of people living there, if not maybe 1,000. So there was a lot of kids, and the whole neighborhood was run by kids. There were kids everywhere. Then we had this big giant park next door called Rosedale Park, and that's where this first hip-hop stuff where they would come out with their DJ equipment, and I guess they would plug into the lamppost or something, with electricity. Right, yeah. And I remember the first time seeing that, I was like, what is going on here? And it was take over the whole park, and it's just, it was a different time, and it was gangs. There was Black Spades were very, very powerful. And if you had any problem, if I had any problem, I would go to Fat Steve, and he would take care of it with the Black Spades. Or if you had any problem with other kids. So I can kind of see that he could organically rise out of that, even as a young man. Because I rose up to some pretty big stuff at 19 years old, and the stuff that I was involved in, in my activities coming out of that same cesspool. So who knows, man? Who knows?
Oh, yeah. I mean, who knows? We can only speculate, or
right.
I can only speculate. But what was your encounter with Bambaataa? You said you'd met him. I mean, what were the circumstances?
We all grew up in the same neighborhoods, playing hit off the barrel and hit off the wall. It was like a version of stickball. And then he would be there later on because he was my sister's age. He was older than my sister. My sister was born in 1959. So he was a couple older years. He would definitely remember my sister for sure. But he was just one of these older, respected guys and growing up in the neighborhood. That when you had a problem, you went to them. And other things too is, these same guys, not him in particular, but those same guys around him and his group and that stuff, before they all became Black Spades and stuff, they used to coach the football team and stuff like that, They were doing that kind of stuff too. I never witnessed any kind of pedophilia over there. There was at the movie theaters. We know what's going on over there. But otherwise, I never saw anything like that. So... Well,
I mean, it remains the case that he's not been convicted of anything.
Right.
but we have, 4 different guys coming forward and stating that he's a historic paedophile. So we have only their word to go on, I guess. But why would these people come out and state something like that if it's not true? You could even write off one of them and say, oh, maybe he's just an attention seeker. But when you've got 4 of them all backing each other up, and Ron Savage has got this phone call where the Universal Zulu Nation tried to pay him off to retract his statement. I can't see why people would be saying all this stuff if there wasn't some foundation to it.
Now you were telling me off the air too about the death of one guy on June 20th. What's the story with that?
Yeah, well, this is probably unrelated. There's a very faint connection. There's this guy, Dr. Malachi York, I think I mentioned him earlier, was the leader of this New Warbian movement, which is another offshoot of Islam, which is kind of packaged towards African Americans. And this guy's in jail at the moment. He's serving a 135-year sentence on various different charges. He was also a kind of spiritual teacher who inspired many other prominent people in the hip-hop community. So Afrika Bambaataa is said to have been greatly inspired by the work of Dr. York, as was this guy Prodigy. And Dr. York is said to have been someone that taught these rappers and these other members of the hip-hop community all about the true nature of what really goes on in this world and who's really running things. So we're talking the elite ruling class and all the secret societies that they operate through, whether it's the Illuminati or Freemasonry or these various different groups. So that was what his work was all about. And Prodigy of Mobb Deep, he was one of the members of this group Mobb Deep that were around in the mid-90s, was a student of his work. Prodigy got incarcerated in, I think it was about 2007, spent a bit of time in jail, and that's when he got to reading and studying, and he was able to take on all these works. And when he came out of jail, he started speaking out about all this stuff that he'd discovered. He became very outspoken about the New World Order. He started name-checking the Illuminati in his rhymes, actually going all the way back to 1995, years before this. He'd obviously come across the concept of the Illuminati because he dropped a guest verse on a record by LL Cool J, I Shot Ya, where he said, "Illuminati want my mind, body, and my soul." And that's thought to be the first mention of this group, the Illuminati, in a rap record going back to 95. But, after 2007, he was coming out, calling out Jay-Z. He was stating that Jay-Z had sold his soul and he'd sold out to the elites and that he'd betrayed his people. He didn't represent black people and black culture, and he was working with the enemy and all this sort of stuff. Very outspoken, made many public statements about it, talked about it in interviews, put it into his lyrics. Now, this guy, Prodigy, turned up dead in Las Vegas on the 20th of June after having been hospitalized for a few days. I have to mention the fact that he had a lifelong condition with sickle cell anemia, and he struggled with this from birth. It's referenced in a couple of diss records by Tupac. So Mobb Deep kind of fell foul of Tupac during this whole East Coast, West Coast hip-hop beef in the mid-90s, which resulted in the murders of Tupac and Notorious B.I.G. So in a couple of records, Tupac is calling out Prodigy from Mobb Deep, and he's kind of making fun of the fact that he's got sickle cell anemia. And so it's known that he had this condition, and the implication is that he died from it. And that may well be the case, but I do find it quite interesting that he died on the 20th of June, which is the day before the summer solstice, because one thing that I have come to understand through my research is that these dark occult practitioners, these elites, do love their significant dates. They love solstices, they love equinoxes, they love religiously significant dates. And so here we have this guy, turning up dead just before the summer solstice. And I just find it suspicious that you have someone that was very outspoken about these elite secret societies who rolls up dead at the age of 42. There's one other interesting and suspicious death that I should mention as well. This guy, TC Islam, a guy by the name of TC Islam, who was also a member of the Universal Zulu Nation. So he was caught up in this whole thing. And when all these revelations about Bambaataa came out, he kind of joined in the conversation. And I think he also stated that it was known that Bambaataa was into paedophilic activity. And TC Islam just happened to turn up dead on the 8th of June this year in Atlanta. And there's very little information that's been given about the nature of his death. all that I've been able to discover is that he was found dead on a sidewalk in Atlanta on the 8th of June. There's been no police report or statement, there's been no coroner's report, and no further information is available about the nature of his death. So that's quite an interesting and suspicious element to this whole story as well, which I just wanted to throw into the mix. The Prodigy thing seems to be completely unrelated to the Bambaataa. I just wanted to throw it into the conversation as we're talking about, the hip-hop scene generally.
Now, real quick, did he live in Vegas?
No, he was visiting.
And do you know what hospital he died in?
Offhand, I don't know. Okay. I could find that out, but I don't know offhand.
Vegas is a place where, because the cops kill people here, they get away with it. There's only been one arrest of a cop here in 30 years for killing an unarmed civilian. So it's a kind of place where you could hire the right people to get somebody killed here.
Look at what happened to Tupac.
Right.
On the Strip, on the goddamn Strip, one of the busiest thoroughfares in America, I guess. And 20 years later, they just don't seem to be able to catch anyone.
Have you read John Podash's book, FBI War on Tupac?
I've heard him in radio interviews talking about it.
And what do you make of that? What do you think?
I like his material, and I think he's very much on the right track with a lot of it.
Yeah, I like him very much, too. I've had him on the show several times. Now, what about because I'm from Staten Island, too. I moved from the Bronx to Staten Island. What about the Wu-Tang Clan? How do they fit into all this? Anything?
Wu-Tang Clan, I don't have a whole lot on them. There is some interesting symbolism that's cropped up in a few videos, particularly by RZA, their producer, the RZA. And I've heard suggestions that RZA is down with certain occult secret societies. Nothing that I can prove. You just hear these kind of whisperings. The most interesting thing about Wu-Tang Clan, I guess, would be their member, Old Dirty Bastard,
right.
Russell Jones, who turned up dead a few years ago, 2004, I think it was, quite a young age. And that was very sudden and quite suspicious. And he'd started putting things into his lyrics about FBI, don't you be watching me. And he was talking about how the feds are tailing him all the time. And he also used to behave in a very erratic kind of manner, which, again, from my extensive research into mind control programming and how that all works, his behaviors used to be very consistent with somebody that has undergone mind control programming, trauma-based mind control. We saw a rendering of that quite recently in the behavior of Kanye West. If you go back to November, around about the time of the elections, you had this concert in Sacramento, California, where Kanye West was up on stage and he just started ranting incoherently about this and about that. And he started talking about, I'm on my Trump shit. He was talking about basically supporting Donald Trump. And then he's just rambling about all this stuff. And he starts talking about elite circles and elite controllers of the industry and that sort of thing. Then he starts talking about Jay-Z. And he keeps saying, Jay, don't be sending those killers up in my head now.
Right, you have those killers pointed at my head, yeah.
Yeah. As if Jay-Z's got some kind of hold over his head or his mind.
Yeah.
And people are now asking, is Jay-Z some kind of mind control handler for Kanye West? Because these behaviors are very strange. And Kanye West was sort of carted off stage after that.
Right.
And I hear he was strapped down to a gurney and taken by force off to a psychiatric hospital for evaluation. What's the betting? It was Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in LA, which seems to be the place that all these celebrities go for evaluation and rehab.
Yeah, when he got out and he went to Trump Tower with Trump, he said, I just want to be photographed with Trump. That's all I want. I don't want to say anything. I just want a picture. I just want a picture standing next to this man. So in case he did die, they would have to say something, Very interesting.
Right.
Hey, real quick.
So his behavior was consistent with that of many other people. Britney Spears, when she shaved her head and went a bit crazy a few years ago. I'm reminded of Mariah Carey, who we mentioned earlier. There was an incident in 2001 where she was on stage and she started rambling incoherently, just talking about whatever. And she had to be carted off stage by her handlers, I guess. And then she was out of the public eye for a period after that. And we got the story that she'd gone into rehab. She'd apparently tried to commit suicide, we were told. And she was, having to be psychologically reassessed. So Old Dirty Bastard's behavior is very consistent with what we've seen from these other celebrities. Justin Bieber, the same way. Justin Bieber came to London a few years ago, just started behaving in very erratic, strange, unpredictable ways. You know, we get Lindsay Lohan running around Hollywood doing weird stuff, and so many other celebrities as well. And I think it's all connected.
Yeah, Method Man came to my store in the Staten Island Mall when I was selling beepers and cell phones. This is at the beginning of his career, and he wanted to get a cell phone. And the only ID he had on him, he had no driver's license, no other ID. The only identification card he had was from being a patient at South Beach Psychiatric Center. That was the only ID card that he had on him. Yeah, so who knows what's going on there. And I'll tell you something else, too. A lifelong friend of mine, I've known him since we grew up together in Annandale on Staten Island, and then he later on became a security guard at my school when he was only 19 years old. And this guy was involved in several murders, and the police informant got away with galore, whatever he wanted, and really tragic life, cursed lifestyle. And he became for the Wu-Tang Clan, he became in charge of all their merchandising. Practically a homeless guy, practically toothless. Okay, and went working for them. Yeah, so who knows what's going on with that bunch, man? But I was always a little suspicious of.
Well, who knows?
Yeah, I know. And plus, I don't need any headaches. Oh, you know what, man? We're running out of time. I know you got to get to your kid and put your daughter to bed. What do you want to leave us with?
Well, I just wanted to make the point that these revelations or these suggestions or these hints that the hip-hop industry may not be quite what we thought it was is pretty devastating to me personally, because I've been a big fan of hip-hop for many, many years. I became a DJ playing in that genre. I actually DJ'd alongside Afrika Bambaataa and Jazzy J one time. This was 1998 when I was a resident DJ at this big club in Cardiff called The Forum. It was in the heyday of R&B and hip-hop when that had become a massive force in the club scene in the UK. And I was absolutely over the moon to have this legendary figure, Bambaataa, at our club. So, such was the status that the man had. And so I can understand how it is devastating and it's world-shattering for people to hear that people that they've revered as heroes may not be quite who they thought they were. And it's a very difficult job that I've got and that other people have got in exposing all this stuff. And I don't do it with any great joy or relish. I don't do this work to piss on people's parades. I don't do this work to piss people off. I just do it because I think it needs to be done. And there's very few people that seem to be willing to look into all these dark corners and expose what they find there. So I just think myself and the others that do this kind of work are doing a service to people and giving them the opportunity to understand what's really going on and to just look at situations and individuals with fresh eyes. So I just wanted to say that about it, really. And everyone has their heroes. You might not be into hip-hop. Maybe you're into rock music.
Right.
Maybe you've got a favorite Hollywood actor. Maybe you've got a favorite sports star. And nobody likes hearing that these people might not have got to the top in the way that we were told they did. But hey, it is what it is, and people can either handle it or they can't. So that's what it is. I do this work somewhat reluctantly, but all this will be going into my next book, Musical Truth Volume 2. That's due out in the new year. I'm looking to get that out in January, and then next year I'll be doing a whole load of radio interviews and talks and stuff to promote it. So maybe we could connect again then, Ed.
I'd love to have you back. And like you said, listen, one day we all had to learn there was no Santa Claus, And, listen, it's time we all grow up here and start resisting this stuff and then fighting back. Mark Devlin, markdevlin.co.uk is his website. Check him out there, markdevlin.co.uk. MusicalTruthBook.com. That's where you can get the first book. And when the next book comes out, we'll have you back on the show. Don't forget, Phoenix, Arizona, March 10th, 2018. You got plenty of time to save up and buy those tickets. You got no excuse. The Truth Mind Reality Conference in Phoenix, Arizona. Do you know what hotel that's going to be at?
Let me just get that information. I do have it. Also at that event, I believe Lennon Honor is speaking.
Oh, really?
Great guy. Love his work. Sonia Barrett is going to be there. And there's going to be a few other people as well. And the venue is the Thunderbird Executive Inn, and Conference Center in Phoenix.
There you go, at the Thunderbird. Thank you so much, Mark Devlin. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks a lot, Ed.
Good night. Okay, they had Mark Devlin. If you like the show, check out OppermanReport.com. That's where we have our member section with additional content. They just mentioned Jeffrey Felix over there on the OJ thing here. I'm the only guy that's ever interviewed Jeffrey Felix. If you want to get it, you got to go to the member section at OppermanReport.com. Boo, boo, boo. Good night.